Hey everyone, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk a little about some social media and a sweet little documentary today on ReFramed. Well, gang, it's so happy to have each and every one of you back listening or watching or whatever it is that you're doing out there in listener land. I'm your host. I'm Chase McKinney. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a nationally certified counselor. And, even though I'm a counselor, I'm not your counselor. So don't let this show be the thing that replaces traditional therapy for you. We talk about mental health thingy things, and we use mental health and pop culture as like an intersection to kind of try and make some sense of it, talk about, topics and issues and everything in between pretty much. But just because of that, don't let these things serve as your replacement for good old-fashioned counseling, for good old-fashioned therapy. There are plenty of great folks out there that can help you. And if you do want to do counseling and you are in Texas, then by all means, let's talk about it. You can go to theredarrowgroup.com, theredarrowgroup.com to get some more information about working together, at least with me, if you're in the state of Texas. I'm also on BetterHelp, so you can look me up. I'll have some information for the video to link directly to both of them. However, if you are local, whether you're local or not, I'm happy to work with you in Texas at least. You have to be a Texas resident for that. And anyway, I've been thinking about this show, and I've been, the thing that's kind of challenging in a way about the show and how I originally structured it was the need for other folks to really join me in being like a co-host. And people's schedules are just so bonkers and all over the place that sometimes it's just hard to find the right people, to not necessarily find the right people, but even the people that have like their schedules to like kind of jive and line up with your own, with being able to talk about the things that you want to talk about on a particular schedule. And one of the more recent ones that we had was with my friend David, and we talked a little bit about Star Wars and things like that. And I also did like a more recent episode where we talked a little bit about free solo and maybe some social anxiety type of stuff. And, today we're going to talk a little bit about really the like social media in general and like what's kind of going on with that. And just what we're seeing in like platforms like Netflix, for example, where we're seeing this particular documentary, where it's really being published, but you can see it, you can watch it really anywhere else, I'm pretty sure. But I was thinking about this show, and like when it was first kind of dreamt up, kind of crafted, of sorts. And that was back, 2-ish years ago. Thereabouts, and I was just starting my my educational journey at Regent, and here recently I was just taking my first set of comprehensive exams, written exams for anyone that's ever heard of or done stuff like that, and it's kind of bonkers, y'all. It's an ordeal. It's a transformational experience, but man, is it bonkers at the same time. Like, this is the thing about comprehensive exams for anyone that maybe has never heard of them is, I think it looks different from discipline to discipline, which that's something that's worth noting and remembering, is that it can look different all over the place. And for mine in particular, I'm in the counselor education and supervision program. So they're really focusing on a lot of different things, like all the content that you've learned over, 2 years of the program, and even you being a professional clinician, just applying it and like thinking about things in a slew of contexts that they throw at you. It's not just like a singular thing. You have to really get creative on how you blend the things and make sense of the things and take these considerations into account for how you respond to something. And at the time of this recording, I have no idea how well I did. None of us do. They're currently being reviewed by the faculty with our responses. I mean, like, folks, like, we had 4 questions. Okay, 2 questions per day. And they were multifaceted. Like, you would have maybe like 2 or 3 subjects per question, pretty much. And you had to like really unpack it and cite like crazy with stuff. And you had 2.5 hours per question. Like, we had like 2 questions a day, but each question had about 4 sub-questions to them. So again, a lot of information, and I'm hoping I did well. I mean, I gave it my best, and that's all that you can ever really, hope for or expect or whatever it might be. And we're hoping we're going to find out here in the next, I don't know, week and a half or so, going into the holidays, with Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything coming up pretty soon. So yeah. And then, from there, if we all pass, whoever passes will advance to oral comprehensive exams, which is basically a 90-minute presentation of just showing off pretty much. So it's a very good experience, I think. And it's a transformative one. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. Now, we do have, a little bit of information apart from like that going on with me, in recent history. We, as it relates to like Channel 49 news, like mental health news that we talk about on this show, the American Counseling Association does a lot of advocacy for the profession of counseling. And recently, November 2nd, at the time of this recording, there was a recent publication on November 2nd that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, I guess they put out like a brief or a memo that has named or stated that counselors named essential during national emergencies. Now, it goes on to talk about how Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has named counselors as essential to the critical infrastructure of the United States of America during national crises. The Department of Homeland Security's CISA has the responsibility of ensuring essential critical infrastructure workers have the ability to work during COVID-19. CISA works with a variety of federal, state, and local agencies as well as the private sector to issue an advisory list of essential personnel. The purpose of the list is to provide state, local, tribal, and territorial officials an essential services list to ensure communities continue to function during disasters, including public health and safety, as well as economic and national security. Though states are not required to adhere to the list provided by CISA, it is clear that counselors are an integral part in supporting the country's needs in a time of crisis. So the fact that counselors are getting more and more notoriety in the American public, I think is fantastic. And recently there has been an expansion of a counselor's role with the federal government as well. There's now been a specific government code that's been created with the Department of Veteran Affairs, if I'm not mistaken. And that's huge for us because so far it's been mainly just psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers that have had the recognition and job codes at the federal level, but not counselors, not LPCs or MHCs, mental health counselors, depending on what they're called. But with the fact that we're getting more recognition, more notoriety, that means that there's more opportunities for expansion, more opportunities for growth and professional development and professional identity development for the counseling profession. So it's a good time to be a counselor. And it's very hopeful that there will be more opportunities for reciprocity. Reciprocity being a fancy way of just talking about being able to cross state lines, essentially. Because currently, right now, if you want to do any kind of counseling, like, for example, I'm in Texas, and where I live in Texas, I'm maybe an hour to an hour and a half away from the Oklahoma border. But like, let's say I lived 1 mile south of the Oklahoma border, I would not be allowed to see anyone in Oklahoma, even if they were a mile away from me, because I am not licensed in Oklahoma. And with what the government is doing with giving the counseling profession more and more, it's making a stronger case for reciprocity of licensing, which could eventually lead to me being able to practice in like Oklahoma or Michigan or Florida or Idaho, or, you name a state in the union, and there's an opportunity that could happen depending on how that gets fleshed out. So it's really cool seeing this growth and just seeing how far counseling has come, in the last 120 or so years. I mean, the counseling profession really came out of the guidance movement by Frank Parsons in the late 19th, early 20th century, essentially following the Industrial Revolution. So that's not a conversation right now, unless you just really want to get in the weeds and talk about the history of the counseling profession. I do a lecture on that with some master's students in an orientation to the counseling profession class. But just seeing like the short amount of time that our profession's been around, and just the rapid growth and just how we're growing it's really cool. It's really cool. And for anyone that is interested in maybe going into counseling, like, feel free to reach out to me and get a hold of me, and let's see what happens. Give me a shout, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. I mean, I know I'm wearing a hat right now for anyone of you watching, and I might look not academic, but I can be whenever it suits me, apparently. I don't know. All right. Well, I think apart from that, the actual content of the show for today, I might go, and I might be switching between two different types of media, because, to be completely honest with you, it reminded me of a piece of media that I've seen, I can't tell you how many times, and give you a hint, it's Star Trek related. So there you go. With this particular piece of media, the Social Dilemma is it's a documentary that has talked about essentially the rise of social media and the influence that it's had on society as a whole. Now, this was a particular piece of media that myself and my classmates were having to watch for one of our classes. And we were kind of talking about how we're not all getting the same information, and how that the way something is portrayed impacts the way in which we kind of are able to advocate and do certain things from like a wellness perspective. And talking about like preventative counseling, for example. And in this particular documentary, it was showing essentially, what could be, or what is happening because of like algorithms and what in like basically our thought life, and how it has impacted our interpersonal interactions, like our social interactions with folks and our ways of communicating with one another. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The Game. And for anyone that's interested in Star Trek, I do run another podcast called These Are the Voyages of Star Trek podcast, where we just talk about Star Trek. Whatever we want to talk about with Star Trek, we talk about it. And with Star Trek, in that particular episode of The Next Generation, The Game, it has it starts out with this character who's got this piece of tech that gives it to one of the main cast members, who in turn takes it back to the Enterprise, and the whole ship starts to really get infatuated with it, to the detriment of people not doing their job, people getting irritable, people seeing other folks as being like the enemy. And ultimately we find out, spoilers, I guess statute of limitations kind of over, since the show's been kind of off the air for almost 30 years pretty much. But we later find out that this piece of tech was designed to be a takeover, not only of the ship, but eventually of the Federation itself, because of mass distribution and the way in which they could reproduce it, basically. And it got me really thinking about how this information is being presented and what it's doing to the young people that we have in our lives. This particular documentary, we can look at research itself and how it talks about teenagers and even just adolescents in general that are having higher suicidal ideation rates, just like higher rates of like suicide compared to generations past, and how it's exponentially grown in recent history. It's alarming what it is, what social media has led to, essentially. And I think about even for me, and probably some of y'all listening, that growing up, like I'm in my early to mid 30s, and I can think about how, what was it? The 90s, pretty much, like the internet was just becoming more of a thing. Like most households were starting to get it. Like it was dial up. Video games weren't what they are today either. They were still cartridge based, and that was it. At least I can't speak for all households, but for mine, like I was only allowed to play video games like one night a week for like an hour or two, at least during the school year. And then in the summer it was a little bit more lax, but it was still pretty strict. The rest of the time I was expected to be playing out in the woods and riding my bike and, swinging on a Tarzan swing in my friend's backyard, where they had a gully and things like that. I was expected to be outside and playing with people, right? And just to see how much stuff has changed, like with the advent of like YouTube and iPhones. I can remember in, I guess it was like high school and college, probably more college than anything else, that MySpace was becoming more of a thing, was the thing. MySpace is still around, but it's not the same as it was in the early 2000s when it first came out. It had music, and it was a place for you to kind of just be with your friends and kind of stay up to date with your friends for the most part. And then Facebook, you had to be a member, you had to be a student of a university to be able to be connected. And then we saw Facebook explode, and MySpace just kind of was like left in the dust, which I still kind of miss MySpace, I'm being kind of honest with you. We saw Facebook explode, and with the explosion of Facebook, there was more expansion of it. I'm not here to dog Facebook. I'm not here to dog Twitter or Instagram or WhatsApp or Snapchat or any of those places. I think they can be good. I think they're neutral, but when they're taken to the extreme, that's when we have issues. And we are seeing that there are challenges with the interpersonal nature of how these things are used and how they are literally changing minds. Literally changing minds. And I don't want people to take this as me being like an alarmist or anything like that. But I do want us to think about, in the context of the documentary, which is about, I think, like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I would highly recommend you go check it out. I don't get any kind of money or nothing from like Netflix or anything like that for talking about this. But I personally watched this on Netflix, like I said, for one of my classes, and go check it out. It's very thought provoking. And think about like the amount of time that you spend on it. I think that there's something to be said about like withdrawal that you can have from like your phones. Like I have my phone right here, like my device right here. And the way that we use something is up to us. It's up to, choosing how to respond to something, much the same way that, we might approach like an area in therapy. How do we respond? How do we choose to respond to a particular thing, right? And something that's pretty interesting that comes about in the documentary is like all these people that started out, they felt like they were doing a good thing. And then it just kind of evolved, and the algorithm kind of grew and like learned from itself, almost like a Skynet kind of thing that we learn in like Terminator, like the machines are learning sort of like that. None of the executives that are being interviewed allow their children to have a social media account or to be on social media. And that should tell us something straight away. Like I was starting to say, neuroplasticity is a big old fancy word for change your mind. And what I mean by that is, neuro essentially means brain or mind, and plasticity is ability to change or can be changed. So your brain can be changed when we talk about neuroplasticity. So when you realize how much time you spend and just the what it's doing neurochemically to your brain, there's the opportunity for change to truly occur when you make that intentional decision to change, to choose to not always have your phone on you. They talk about, and I agree with this, that with your phones and having like your push notifications and like the constantly being in the know kind of thing, whenever you are, you're like on Facebook, for example, just take that for example, like you nowadays, like on your smartphone, you'll like pull down the top of the page and it'll refresh. And they are comparing that to kind of like being at like the slots at like, like at a casino or something. And it's kind of like you're pulling down the bar and see what you're going to win. And I know for me personally, I get frustrated because like I might be in the middle of reading something and then I just like, I minimize it or come back to it and I can't find the thing. And that's intentional. So everything is meant to be like a quick hit with it. So this thing is talking a little bit about like addiction and a little bit about like interpersonal communication, interpersonal relationships, and how it's like all melding together. And we look at that and we look at what we see in the episode, The Game on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it's a little scary, if I'm being honest with y'all listening, for anyone that does still listen to this thing. It's a little scary just noticing that and seeing how it has played out, how it does play out. And in fact, what I want y'all to do, if you're really feeling up to it, is to go watch this documentary. So The Social Dilemma Again, it's on Netflix. And then also go watch The Game. So The Game is, like I said, it's Star Trek. And it's Star Trek The Next Generation season 5. I want to say like episode 5 or 6, depending on like where you're watching it. And just go check it out. So just to kind of put the time into perspective, season 5 of The Next Generation is going to be around 1992, thereabouts. So 91, 92, depending. So the fact that we're seeing essentially the rise of social media and like what can happen, basically 15 to 20 years prior to it happening, is kind of crazy. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? Okay, Chase, you freaked us the heck out. What do we do about it? Let's set some limits. Let's set some boundaries. Okay. If we're talking about boundaries is like another way of saying like safety net. Like we know what the limits are, with boundaries. Like, I talk about this with my clients, fairly regularly, that children need boundaries. And children test boundaries as part of good, healthy attachment development. If I had like a table right in front of me and I got a pen out with like no cap and it could just roll, if I set it down, that pen might roll. And, as long as it's on the table, it's safe. It's not going to fall off, basically. But if it goes beyond that, it's going to fall off. It's not going to be on the table anymore. And I think y'all understand where I'm going with this, but just keep in mind that if we define like, okay, this table, this is the thing that I'm defining as what I'm okay with, right? So that could be like a time limit. That could be certain applications, certain television shows or movies or platforms that you're okay with yourself or your family members watching, especially if you have little children. There's so much stuff that's going on in kids' minds as it's developing that we have to be extra vigilant and cautious about that. So just that's something to kind of keep in mind is like, okay, what am I okay with? Maybe it's no more than 5 minutes, 10 minutes of social media per day starting out, or 20 minutes. If you're at like an hour or 2 hours a day, maybe you got to like kind of tear it down a little bit, and before you go down to like a 0, and choosing other things like going out and doing other hobbies and things that you might enjoy perhaps rather than always being plugged in. Another boundary could be no cell phones next to your nightstand. Believe it or not, they still make clocks with alarms on them. You don't need your telephone. You don't need your cell phone, your mobile. If you're listening to me in the UK, you don't need it next to on your nightstand to wake you up in the morning. You can go to like a Walmart or some other type of store, like a corner store even, that sells those cheap little alarm clocks that will tell the time and it'll go off at like 6 a.m. if you need to. You don't need your phone. So phones off after a certain time and kept in the kitchen. And I know just me saying that, some of y'all are freaking out like, oh, I can't do that, Chase. I know you can. You can totally do that. So there are things that can be done. And the thing that I really like about the Social Dilemma documentary is that at the very end, it does give tips on how to unplug and how to develop more boundaries. And I don't want to get too into that because I want you to watch it and to arrive at your own conclusions about it. So with that, I know that this has been a brief episode and that I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I hope that this is some information that you have enjoyed and that you will act on. So again, make sure that you go and you check it out. Go check out The Social Dilemma. Go check out the episode Star Trek The Next Generation called The Game, Season 5, around episode 5 or 6. Again, that's in 1991, 1992 time frame. And, if you have enjoyed this content, if you've enjoyed, what you've seen, what you've heard, let us know. I want to hear a little bit about, leave us some comments about like how this show maybe has helped you, or maybe some new thoughts that you've come up with. And again, if you are looking for counseling, I'm happy to help you out, as long as you're in Texas, of course, and it's a good fit. Otherwise, I'll help you find someone maybe that would be a better fit for you. With that, if you do want to get in contact with us, you want to get in contact with me, you want to send in a note to have your comments maybe featured on a future episode of the show, make sure you do that at reframepod@gmail.com. You can also send a note, give us a call at 817-752-4757. There's a 3-minute time limit, and your comments may be used on a future episode of ReFramed. And finally, if you do want to write us a note, just say something, or just want to mail us anything, you can do that. Send it to P.O. Box 2455, Azle, Texas 76098. And y'all, again, thank you for listening to my ramblings as we talk about this stuff today. And as we leave here today, may you always remember to take care and to stay dapper.